The laughter was too polite to be honest, and too real to ignore. My wife stood confidently at the far end of the long private dining table, raising her glass like she was presenting an award. I watched her eyes flick over the faces around us, colleagues, board members, mentors I'd spent years cultivating. "Let's be honest," she said, her voice bright with mock affection. "He's brilliant, but he'd still be chasing the wrong market if I hadn't redirected him." I heard someone across from me let out a low laugh, tight and uncomfortable. Another person cleared their throat like they wished they were anywhere else. I didn't say a word. I didn't even move, just kept my fingers wrapped loosely around my water glass and forced my expression neutral. She was smiling, clearly proud of the attention. "I mean, he's smart," she added, glancing at me with what I think she believed was charm. "But it's a good thing one of us has a spine when it comes to strategy. Otherwise he'd still be bending over backward for that one mentor. What's his name again? The one who still uses a Hotmail account?" A few more people laughed, this time a little more freely. I caught one of them mouthing the word, "ouch," to the person next to him. I stayed silent. I was already calculating how this would be perceived, how fast the story would spread, which part of my credibility had just been sanded down in real time. She reached over suddenly and laid a hand on my forearm. Her voice dropped into a softer, teasing tone. "I'm kidding, babe. Relax." I looked at her and gave a faint smile I didn't mean. It was the only acceptable move in that moment. Anything else would have looked weak. But inside, something shifted. We drove home in silence. Or rather, I drove, and she typed furiously on her phone. I glanced once and saw she was already posting photos from the evening, smile-laced captions, probably tagging everyone who'd been there. After a while, she finally looked up and spoke without any hesitation. "You're being weird. Did something happen?" I kept my eyes on the road, watching the lines blur beneath the headlights. "Nothing happened," I said evenly. She gave a small laugh and pulled her coat tighter around her. "Well, you seemed off at dinner. People were having fun. I noticed," I replied, keeping my voice level. She turned to face me fully, clearly not picking up on the tone. "Look, if you're going to be sensitive about a joke, I can't help that. I was just playing up the dynamic." I let a beat of silence pass before asking the question slowly. "Which dynamic is that?" She gave me a bright, knowing smile like we were in on the same joke. "The truth," she said. "You're the brains. I'm the voice. That's what people love about us." I nodded slightly but didn't respond. Not because I agreed, because I needed the silence to register what I'd just heard. I wasn't angry. Not yet, but I felt it, the exact moment something inside me cooled. That night, she posted a carousel of the evening's best moments. Smiling faces, captioned with things like #PowerCouple and #AlphaWoman. She laughed at her own captions while scrolling through likes. I stepped outside to the balcony and opened my inbox. 2 messages already, both from dinner guests. Shorter than usual. Colder. She'd taken her moment in the spotlight. She believed that made her strong. But the spotlight doesn't shape the room. The network does. And she never built it. I did. The message wasn't in the words. It was in the tone. A certain coolness had crept into the way people responded to me that week. Not hostile, just neutral, in a way they hadn't been before. One contact I'd worked with for 6 years sent back a one-line reply to a proposal he usually would have called to discuss. A partner who used to greet me with enthusiasm now nodded with a tight smile and moved on quickly. It didn't take much to trace the shift. They'd all seen the video. My wife had posted a short clip from the dinner, just the part where she stood with her glass raised and said, "He's brilliant, but let's be honest, I had to redirect him." Her tone was polished, playful. The caption read, "When you're the power behind the throne #PowerCouple #AlphaWoman #No Lies Told." I stared at the screen longer than I should have, waiting for some part of it to hit me as funny. It never came. The post had already racked up hundreds of likes and a comment section full of clapping emojis and phrases like, "Yas Queen," and "She said what needed to be said." Not a single person from my circle had commented. That silence said enough. At home, I tried to keep things normal. I brought up the video once, gently. I asked her if she thought it might have landed wrong. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Oh, come on," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "You're not really upset about that, are you?" "It was a joke." I kept my voice calm. "It didn't sound like a joke to everyone in that room." Finally, she glanced at me. Her tone was light, but there was a flicker of something sharper underneath. People are too sensitive these days. Honestly, you should be flattered. I was hyping you up. I nodded slowly, trying to keep the heat out of my chest. That's not how it came across. She shrugged. If they can't handle me teasing my own husband, maybe they're the problem. You're strong enough to handle that, right? I didn't respond. Not because I agreed, because I was taking stock of her tone, of her posture, of the widening gap between public presentation and private respect. That weekend, she insisted on joining me at a networking brunch I'd originally planned to attend alone. She wore her most confident outfit, greeted everyone with loud warmth, and introduced herself with lines like, "I'm the unofficial strategist behind his success." I stood beside her and smiled, as if nothing had shifted. But inside, I was taking inventory of who leaned in, of who stepped back, of who glanced at me with confusion or quiet amusement, as if asking, "Is this part of the act now?" Later that night, she showed me a photo someone had taken of us at the event, her standing tall, her arm on my shoulder, my expression unreadable. She laughed as she tapped through the shots. "We look unstoppable," she said. I looked at the photo, then at her. She didn't notice the irony. I didn't point it out. Instead, I said quietly, "Just make sure the spotlight doesn't burn the bridge it's standing on." She raised an eyebrow, amused. "That sounds deep. You practicing speeches now?" I smiled once. Something like that. What she didn't realize, and what I hadn't fully admitted to myself until then, was that I wasn't preparing to argue. I was preparing to pull back. It wasn't just in public anymore. At home, her tone had changed. The shift came slowly, like watching a tide rise inch by inch. It began with small interruptions. I'd be mid-sentence during a call with friends or even over dinner, and she'd cut in with a correction. "What he means is," or, "Actually, that's not how it happened." The first few times, I let it slide. We all misspeak sometimes, but this was different. Her interjections weren't clarifications, they were performances. One night, we had a few people over, longtime friends from both sides. We were discussing a decision I'd made early in the company's growth, a move that had paid off. I was halfway through explaining the rationale when she leaned back in her chair, lifted her glass, and said, "He's downplaying how risky it was. I'm the one who told him to take the leap, remember?" Her tone was light, but she didn't look at me when she said it. The room went still for a breath. Then someone laughed, then another. I gave a small nod, keeping my expression even. "That's one way to frame it," I said quietly. After they left, I brought it up, not angrily, not even accusingly. I waited until we were both in the kitchen, putting away plates. "Hey," I said, loading the dishwasher with deliberate calm. "Do you notice how often you correct me in front of other people?" She didn't even pause. "Only when you're wrong," she said, smiling like it was a clever line. I kept my eyes on the plates. "It doesn't feel like correction. It feels like rewriting." She turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "If you can't handle a strong woman challenging your version of things, maybe you're not that strong." I looked at her then. Really looked. Not at her words, but at the way she said them, smiling, certain, completely unaware of how far the needle had moved. She didn't see it as disrespect. To her, it was just her strength, and any discomfort on my end was proof of weakness. I nodded once. "Maybe," I said simply. She seemed satisfied by that. Without another word, she left the room, already shifting her focus back to the version of the night she wanted to remember. I stood alone in the kitchen, letting her words settle in. "Maybe you're not that strong." The line kept circling back, not because it hurt, though it did, but because it confirmed something I hadn't wanted to admit. She'd started to believe the story she was performing. That she was the real foundation. That I was just the front. So I did what I do best when I feel something slipping. I began taking inventory. Not emotionally, strategically. What had I been sharing with her lately? Which contacts, which plans, which meetings? How many of them were tied directly to her presence? I didn't react. I didn't confront. That's not how you win back ground. I just began pulling the threads one at a time. I stopped forwarding her event invites. I stopped syncing my calendar with hers. I started letting silence fill the places where I used to offer information freely. She didn't notice, yet. She thought the dynamic was unchanged. She thought I was recalibrating, adjusting to her rise. She had no idea I was preparing to take my power back, quietly, deliberately, and completely. She thrived on visibility. That was her currency, being in the room, in the photo, in the conversation. and for years I'd welcomed it, encouraged it even. I believed, back then, that partnership meant full transparency. She saw every invite, knew every upcoming meeting, had access to every thread I did. Not anymore. I didn't announce anything. I just began cutting off the flow. My assistant was the first to notice. I asked her to revise the calendar access, remove the shared view. No need to make a scene. I framed it as a security review, nothing more. She nodded once, understanding more than I said. Next, I reviewed our CRM systems. A few contact lists had her email listed under shared stakeholders. I removed them one by one. Then I reset passwords, not all at once. Over 2 weeks, I changed logins, rerouted accounts, updated authorizations. By the time she noticed anything missing, it would already be out of reach. At home, I kept the rhythm unchanged. We ate dinner at the same table. We discussed the same surface-level news. She told stories from her day, recounted compliments she'd received, mentioned meetings she planned to attend with me soon. I nodded, smiled where appropriate, and offered nothing. When she asked about an upcoming business lunch I'd previously mentioned, I sipped my coffee and said casually, "It got rescheduled. I'll keep you posted." She didn't press. Why would she? She thought the schedule still passed through her. The real shift came when I stopped mentioning names. In the past, I'd talk freely. Who I was meeting, who was coming into town, who was looking to invest. Now, I spoke in outlines. Someone from the West Coast team. A few of the early partners. She didn't notice the change in language, but my contacts did. They noticed that the introduction stopped. The conference passes stopped. The forwarded agendas stopped. One evening, she walked into my office holding her tablet. "Hey," she said, standing in the doorway. "Weren't we going to that industry mixer Thursday night?" I looked up from my screen and leaned back. "I'm attending," I said evenly. "But I didn't RSVP for a +1. Her expression flickered, just for a second. Then the confidence returned. "Why not? We always go together." I let a pause settle before replying. "They capped the list. It's a smaller gathering this time." She frowned slightly but nodded, masking it quickly. "Okay. Just let me know how it goes." "I will," I said, and returned to my laptop. She stood there a moment longer, then turned and left. She hadn't said it, but I could feel the question building behind her eyes. Not the kind that gets asked out loud. The kind that hovers when someone who's always had access suddenly finds a locked door where there used to be a hallway. But she still didn't see the pattern. She thought this was temporary, maybe logistical. She didn't realize the wall was permanent, and rising. I wasn't punishing her. I wasn't trying to make a point. I was taking back control of what I built. I wasn't hers to display anymore. It's strange how little needs to be said when people already sense the shift. I spent years stitching together the kind of network most people only dream of. Real relationships. Quiet loyalty. The kind that doesn't need a stage. So when I began the withdrawal, I didn't need to broadcast it. I just moved. My assistant removed her from the last 2 distribution lists she still had passive access to, board reports and high-level planning briefs. Nothing abrupt, nothing loud. If she noticed, she didn't mention it. But I knew it would catch up to her soon enough. Then I took the next step. I called 3 of the key people she'd leaned on recently, mentors she only knew through me. I didn't complain. I didn't ask them to choose sides. I simply re-established direct contact, clarified my current direction, and thanked them for their past support. They understood immediately. No questions. One of them even said, "I was wondering when you'd make this call." At home, the rhythm kept playing as if nothing had changed. She scrolled through her socials, posted affirmations about growth and ambition, and still used phrases like, "We're launching," or "Our expansion." I let her. There was no need to correct a fantasy in motion. Fantasies collapse on their own. It was at a Tuesday dinner, just the 2 of us, that I noticed her reach for my phone across the table. Not maliciously. It was casual, like muscle memory. I watched her thumb hover before I said, "Don't worry about that one. It's work." She pulled her hand back with a tight smile. "You used to ask me to prove things." I met her eyes without blinking. "I've streamlined some roles." She didn't argue. She simply nodded, but something shifted in her jaw. The smile didn't quite reach her eyes after that. By Friday, she'd begun asking more questions, wrapped in compliments. "Who was that guy you mentioned last week? The investor from the Southeast? He sounds impressive." I gave her a vague name, and changed the subject. She didn't press, But her pauses got longer. Her first real slip came that weekend. She reposted an old clip of a speaking engagement we'd done together, tagging a few people who were no longer taking her calls. The caption said, "Power is built, not given. Some of us build it together." The engagement was low. I watched quietly as she deleted it an hour later. She still thought this was temporary. A hiccup. She didn't understand that this wasn't withdrawal as punishment. It was redefinition. She hadn't lost access to me. She'd lost access to what came with me. And the doors she once walked through so confidently? They didn't open for her anymore. Because they never opened for her. They opened because of me. She always believed visibility equaled credibility. So when her usual streams started drying up, fewer invites, slower replies, she doubled down. It started with a new initiative. She decided she would host a live panel on modern partnership dynamics in business. She came into the living room one night with that determined gleam in her eyes, the same look she used to get before pitching something risky. "I'm organizing a live stream," she said, sliding her tablet in front of me. "High-level panel. A few influencers, some brand strategists. I'll lead the conversation about partnership and balance." I glanced at the screen, noting the draft list of names. Most of them were people from my side of the map. She leaned closer, pointing to the screen. "I'm name-dropping our firm as a case study. The way we built it, together. That arc always lands." I didn't correct her. There was no need. "Have you reached out to these people yet?" I asked casually, my voice even. She smiled. "Not yet. I figured a few intros from you would make it smoother." I set the tablet down slowly. "You said you wanted to own the narrative." "I do," she said, eyebrows rising. "But I'm being strategic. These people know you. If I reach out cold, it looks presumptuous." I nodded once, then leaned back in my chair. "Maybe that's the right approach now." She tilted her head, the smile faltering slightly. "What does that mean?" I held her gaze. "It means if you want to stand on your own, you should stand on your own. See who answers when the message comes from you." Her lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came for a second. Then she forced a light laugh. "Are you trying to hold me back now? Is that what this is?" I shook my head. "No. I just assumed you had the power now." She didn't respond. A few days later, I heard her on a call in her office, voice bright, edges slightly strained. She was pitching the panel idea, throwing in buzzwords, dropping names, but the smile in her tone didn't land. The silence between sentences stretched a little too long. Later that week, she came to me again. "Did you talk to Lisa?" "She hasn't returned my message. Neither has Dev or Colin." I shrugged, keeping my tone neutral. "They're busy people. Maybe they're being strategic, too." She didn't like that. I saw it in the way her fingers curled around her phone, her nails tapping the screen with restless urgency. But she didn't say what she was really thinking, that none of them would have ignored her before. That when my name stood behind hers, doors opened. Now, the silence was growing. Her panel went live the following Thursday, with a smaller guest list than originally planned. 2 speakers cancelled the morning of. The third dropped out midstream due to connection issues. She powered through anyway, talking to the camera with a polished smile and firm voice. The comments were light. A few automated hearts floated past. No major brands reposted it. The replay never gained traction. That night, she sat on the couch scrolling through her analytics. She didn't say a word, just stared at the numbers like they owed her something. I poured myself a drink, walked past her, and said gently, "You said you wanted your own platform." She didn't answer. She was starting to understand something she'd never needed to before. There's a difference between speaking loudly and being heard. The cracks weren't loud. That's the thing about real erosion. It doesn't scream, it just keeps happening. She tried to pretend the panel had been a win. She posted highlights, clipped phrases from her own monologue, captioned it with things like, "Standing strong, leading louder," and, "When one door closes, I build my own." But even that felt forced. The engagement was sparse, the comments thin. A few polite compliments, no follow-up inquiries, no new leads. Then the first real loss landed. It came quietly, just a one-line email from a PR agency she'd been courting for months. "We're pivoting in a different direction at this time." She read it twice before calling me into her office. "Do you know someone there?" she asked, holding up the screen. I didn't even look at it. "They've worked with us before." "Why?" She narrowed her eyes. "I pitched them my solo content arc. They seemed interested. Now they're backing out." I kept my tone level. Maybe their direction changed. She hesitated. Then her voice tightened. Are you interfering? I looked at her, really looked. Not the makeup or the lighting or the performative stance she adopted when she was being challenged. I looked past all that, into the question she didn't want to ask. Are you finally turning your back on me? I thought you didn't need the same contacts, I said quietly. I thought this was your independent phase. She didn't answer. She just turned back to her screen and scrolled, as if the right number or message might still appear. But it didn't. 2 days later, her biggest collaboration pulled out. A wellness brand she'd partnered with on a mini-series about relationship leadership. She planned the launch for next month. Photos were already taken. Draft copy was written. They canceled without ceremony, just said they were reprioritizing partnerships. She didn't mention that one to me directly. I only knew because one of their project leads reached out to me to clarify that our firm's involvement was completely separate. We still want to work with you, the email said. Just not through her. That's when it truly started. The ripple. The unspoken shift among my network. No one blocked her. No one badmouthed her. They just stepped back, quietly, politely, completely. And without the echo of shared credibility, her voice didn't land the same. She still posted. Still spoke in the same assertive tone. But now, responses came from strangers, not colleagues. Her inbox didn't fill. Her pitches didn't land. Even her live stream metrics flatlined. I watched her try to adjust. She toned down the power couple narrative. She reposted more solo affirmations. She shifted focus to personal branding. But the platform she thought she stood on, it had never been hers. It had been borrowed, extended from the goodwill of a network that no longer had a reason to keep her connected. One night, I walked past her open laptop. She had 3 tabs open, one to her analytics dashboard, another to a message thread with a contact who hadn't replied, and a third to a deleted draft caption. Sometimes strength is walking alone. She hadn't posted it. Maybe because she finally understood the weight of what alone actually feels like. It didn't fall apart all at once. That would have been easier to watch, honestly. No, it unraveled slowly. So slowly that she kept trying to hold the threads together even after they'd slipped through her fingers. She was still dressing the part. Still posting daily. Still speaking as if the world was listening. But the silence that followed her posts was unmistakable now. The likes trickled in from strangers. The comments came from the same recycled handful of lifestyle accounts. None of the people that mattered responded. None of them shared. And most telling, none of them called her back. I'd watch her scroll through her feed with a furrowed brow, refreshing the page as if the algorithm was the problem. She didn't ask for help. She didn't need to. I knew what she was hoping, that someone would tag her, mention her, invite her to something that mattered. No one did. The next business dinner I attended alone. No photos. No public RSVP. Just a private table with 4 people who'd been instrumental in our firm's early traction. People who once spoke to her warmly, who once praised our dynamic. One of them leaned toward me after dessert and said, "She's really leaning into the solo brand, huh?" I gave a tight smile. That was her call. He nodded slowly. Some people know how to lead a conversation. Some only know how to hold the mic. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. At home, I started seeing little signs of her reckoning. Open tabs on her laptop with headlines like, "Rebuilding influence in a saturated market." Notes scribbled in her planner, half-finished taglines, bullet points that sounded more desperate than driven. She started asking subtle questions. "Have you heard from David recently?" Or, "Do you know if Arya is still handling brand partnerships for Legacy Group?" I answered with brief honesty. "Yes, but we didn't talk business." Or, "She's moved on to a different firm." She didn't press. But the questions kept coming, each one confirming what I already knew. She was feeling the isolation now. Not in dramatic collapses or slammed doors. In the way people nodded politely, then kept moving. In the way her emails weren't being returned, and her calls went to voicemail without follow-up. One evening, she dressed up for an event that had quietly removed her name from the panel a week earlier. I'd seen the email. She hadn't. Or maybe she had and decided to go anyway, hoping to still reclaim space. She came home 2 hours later, heels in hand, eyes tired. I didn't ask how it went. She didn't offer. Instead, she poured herself a glass of wine, sat at the dining table, and stared at nothing for a long while. It wasn't shame I saw in her. Not quite. It was disbelief. The kind that only comes when someone who once stood in every room starts realizing that none of those rooms were hers to begin with. They were invitations, and invitations can be revoked. It came on a Tuesday night, mid-sentence, over something as ordinary as pasta. We'd sat down to eat like we always did. The food was warm, the lights dimmed low, everything suggested normalcy. She even poured wine for both of us, asked about my day, smiled like nothing had shifted. But underneath it, I saw the strain. She barely touched her plate. She picked at the edge of her napkin. Her eyes kept drifting to her phone, face tightening every time she flipped it over to check again. No notifications. Halfway through the meal, she dropped her fork onto the plate with a dull clink and said, "I didn't mean to take anything from you." I looked up slowly, registering the crack in her voice. "I thought it was a shared story," she continued, hands folded on the table like she was delivering a confession. "I wasn't trying to erase you. I just wanted people to see me too." The quiet hung heavy between us. No defense. No performance. Just raw air. I set my glass down and kept my voice low. "You didn't take anything I didn't hand you." She shook her head, eyes wet but not falling. "You stopped trusting me. You pulled away. Everything's gone now." I sat back in my chair and studied her, really studied her. This wasn't the polished public version. This wasn't the strategist. This was the aftermath, and the realization that no stage, no spotlight, no carefully posed caption could fill the silence she'd created. "You wanted to show everyone what power looks like," I said carefully. "They believed you." She flinched slightly, but didn't deny it. "You thought power meant being the one talking louder," I continued. "But they didn't follow you because of your voice. They followed because they believed in what we built, quietly, together." She looked away, pressing her lips tight. "They don't answer me anymore. I reach out, and it's like I don't exist." "They're not avoiding you to be unkind," I said. "They just don't recognize the version of you that left the partnership." That part hit her. I saw it in the way she exhaled, long and shallow, like her lungs had forgotten how to hold air. "I didn't want to lose you," she said finally. "You didn't," I replied. "Not until you started building without looking down at the foundation." We sat in silence after that. The food went cold. The wine lost its flavor. And in the stillness, she finally saw the truth. This was never about punishment. It was about reality. About accountability. And about the fact that once you spend enough time treating a shared life like a spotlight, the people holding the lights start walking away. She didn't break down when I told her. She blinked twice, slowly, like she was making sure she'd heard me right. Then she set the mug down on the counter and asked, "You're serious?" I nodded once. "I've already spoken to someone. I'll be moving forward with the separation next week." Her arms folded instinctively across her chest, but it wasn't a defensive move. It was protective, like she was trying to shield herself from something that had already landed. "So that's it," she said. "You just walk away." "I already did," I said. "You just didn't see it happen." She didn't move. She didn't argue. Maybe because the fight was gone. Or maybe because she finally understood there wasn't one to win. She'd made a name for herself in our circles, bold, magnetic, dynamic. But in the weeks that followed, the truth became harder for her to outrun. One by one, the bridges she used to cross without thought went dark. The mentors she once leaned on? Silent. The collaborators who once championed her? Polite distance. The mutual clients who once treated her like an extension of me? Quietly shifted their communication. Some formally. Some with a single cold email, copied without emotion. "Moving ahead, we'll be coordinating directly with him." She tried to hold on. She made a few calls, tried to remind them of past successes, shared metrics and memories. They nodded. Then they moved on. When the paperwork arrived at the house, she read every line. Her name remained on some documents, but the terms were clear: assets divided, accounts reassigned, access quietly discontinued. I handled it all calmly. No outbursts, no threats, just clarity, precision. She watched me pack a travel bag. Not rushed, not dramatic, just the essentials. "You're really doing this," she said, almost to herself. I met her eyes. "You showed the world you didn't need me. I'm letting you prove it." That landed. I saw her inhale sharply, as if trying to respond, then stopped herself. She knew anything she said would echo louder in silence than in protest. Within a week, I moved out. Not to some loud bachelor retreat, but to a quiet apartment near the office. I met with advisors, partners, former colleagues, People who'd kept their distance out of confusion, but were now re-engaging with quiet relief. She overplayed her hand, one of them said over coffee. People respect ambition, but they respect discretion more. I didn't agree or disagree. I just nodded, focused on the work in front of me. At home, what used to be home, she started getting questions she couldn't answer. Why wasn't she on the invite list anymore? Why hadn't her brand proposals been picked up? Why were certain names ghosting her? Because they weren't ghosting. They were moving on. So was I. Not in anger. In clarity.